All right, here's some extra practice or some extra help for 3.3 in Pre-Calc 20, completing the square. I know this is a little difficult, but once you do a couple, you can kind of see how the steps help you, okay? So first things first, completing the square, what you're actually doing is you're taking something like a quadratic in standard form and you're changing it to vertex form. So standard form is something like this. So y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, right? That's your standard form. And when you complete the square, you put it basically in a different form. So after you're done completing the square, you have something like this. Y equals a times x minus p squared plus q, right? This is your vertex form. And then this is your standard form. Okay. And the reason we do this, or the reason I teach you how to do this, is because it's important to know where your vertex is. And you can't just look at that standard form and go, oh, boom, there's my vertex. Okay. Remembering vertex is always P comma Q. Okay. So if you look at the textbook questions, this is on page 192, the assignment that I gave you. So this is page 192. I'm going to do number 1C with you. Okay, so if you look at 1C, it says x squared plus 14x plus c. Okay, and then in the actual question itself, it says determine the value of c. Okay, and then it says, what is the equivalent binomial square? So I might not have went as in detail in my last video about what that really means. All you need to remember to do is when you're doing questions like this, okay, and you're actually completing the square, in order to figure out what that c value is, you take this b value, so 14, you divide it by 2. Okay, 14 divided by 2 is 7. Perfect. And then you square that. So what's 7 squared? 49. Okay, it is those same steps all the time. B divided by 2 equals whatever you get, and then square it, and then you get your number. So that 49 becomes your C. So I'm going to have x squared plus 14x plus 49. Okay, the plus always comes first. So now that I've added 49, this is a nice looking quadratic, okay? And what we do in order to change that into vertex form, okay, if I'm going from there to vertex form, you literally take the square root of the first term, okay? Square root. Square root of x squared is x. You take the sign of the second term. So the sign of the second term is plus. And then you take the square root of the last term. Okay, so it honestly, it follows that step every single time. All right, square root of the first, sign of the second, square root of the last, and then you put that little squared, right? Because that follows, where'd that go? That follows this formula, right? A times x minus p squared plus q. Okay, so we're able to basically find our vertex from that. All right, this is your p and your q while your q is gone. So if I were to write p equals, p, you always switch the sign. So right now it's positive 7, so p will now be negative 7. Q, there is no q, so that means it's 0. So my vertex would be negative 7, 0. Okay? Perfect. So that's what you have to do for number 1. Number 2 in the textbook assignment is basically writing the equation in vertex form by completing the square. So if I did 2a, okay, when I do these questions, I always have my sheet of steps right beside me. Okay, the slides that I did in the very first video, okay, there's 5 steps there. Follow those steps and you'll be okay. So A said y equals x squared plus 8x. Okay, so step 1 says isolate the terms involving x. So that means these are the ones that have an x in them, right? So did that. Step 2 says factor the coefficient off of the x squared term. Well, let's look at that x squared term for a second. It's right here. Is there any number in front? No, so we don't have to do that step. Okay, we leave that step alone. Then we move to step 3, which says take half the x term. Okay, so here's my x term, right? My x term is 8. So half of that is dividing by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Then it says square it. 4 squared is 16. Okay, and then apply that to both sides. Then it says watch out for brackets. So what that means is you always add it first and then subtract it. Okay, so you're going to add 16, subtract 16. So this is what I get. So I add it, then I put my brackets because I'm not dealing with the subtract 16 anymore. That stays on the outside. Okay. All right, so after I've added it, this right here is called a perfect trinomial, okay? And that's when I do literally what I just did in question 1, okay? Square root of the first term, sine of the second, square root of the third. That's what I do now. So square root of the first term is x. Sine of the second is plus square root of the third. What's the square root of 16? 4, then you put the squared there, right? And then you just have the minus 16 hanging out by itself. Okay, and then that's your answer. Because I have my P and I have my Q. So I know this isn't in the question, but if they wanted you to find P comma Q, P you always flip the sign, so it's going to be -4. Q you always keep the sign. So that's your vertex. Okay? So hopefully, I guess as I do a few, you can see how those steps play out, okay? I'll do C for you, 2C. I'm going to do it a little faster. So y equals x squared minus 10x, sorry, that's a 10, plus 31. All right, so step 1, isolate terms involving x. So put your brackets wherever you see the x's. So it's always those first 2 terms, okay? Step 2, factor the coefficient off of the x squared term. Is there a coefficient there? No, so we can't do that step. Move on to step 3. Take half of the x term. So here's my x term. Take half of it. Don't worry about the sign here. The sign, honestly, it doesn't matter. So just take the number. So it's 10. Half of 10 is, or divided by 2 is 5. Square it. 5 squared is 25. Okay, now remember, you add 25 first in the brackets, and then you subtract the 25 outside of the brackets, right? So doing that, you'll get x in my brackets, x squared minus 10x. Add the 25. Close your brackets, subtract the 25. And what do we have left over here? The 31. Okay, and the reason you have to make sure that these 2 things don't go inside the brackets is because it would screw up your perfect trinomial squared, which is inside the brackets. Okay, so now if you look at step 4, it says factor the perfect trinomial square you created. So that means you take the square root of the first term, which is x, the sine of the second term, which is negative, and the square root of the third. And then following the pattern, you put the squared, and now you just do this math. So minus 25 plus 31. Should be 6, but I'll just check. Yes. It's only Tuesday. Sometimes the Tuesdays feel like the Monday. So plus 6. Okay? And that's it. That is your that's your vertex form, right? Vertex would be 5, 6. Switch the sign of P, keep the sign of Q. Okay? So I think maybe, well, I guess I do know this. Where these questions do get a little trickier are in questions like 3. So I'm going to do number 3 here. So 3, I'm going to go right to C. Okay? So 3C is basically, you just got to complete the square, but this is what you get. 3x squared. Oh, whoops. I'm reading D. We want C. So y equals 10x squared minus 160x plus 80. Okay, so follow my instructions just like before, or my steps. So the first step is always isolate the x's, okay? You always want to group your x's together. So there we go. All right, so that's good. Then step 2 says factor the coefficient off of the x squared term. Okay, so if we look now, do we have a coefficient in front of our x squared term? Yes, it's 10. So we're going to take that 10 and divide everything by 10. Well, not everything, I guess I should say. Just divide what's in the brackets. Okay, so 10 divided by 10. The 10 comes out in front, right? And 10 divided by 10 goes away. And you're just left with x squared. Here, I have negative 160 divided by 10, which is going to be negative 16x. Okay, I do not divide the positive 80 by 10. Okay, I just leave that by itself. The only thing I divide by the 10 is the stuff in the brackets. Okay, that good so far? Hopefully. So now that I've factored that coefficient off, I need to move on to the third step. And that third step says take half the x term. Okay, so my x term is still right here. So half of that, 16 divided by 2 is 8. And then square it. 8 squared is 64. Yikes. Okay, so 64. So like before, you add 64, and what else do you do? Subtract 64. The adding always comes first. Okay, so now because I have this number in front, I'm going to put some square brackets. Okay, and I'm going to leave the 10, and I'm still going to leave these curly brackets. So x squared minus 16x. Now I take this stuff over here and I got to put it in. So you always add first. So you put the plus 64, then you put your bracket. Okay, now I got to put the minus 64 in here. And then I have to put this square bracket, and I can't forget that 80 over here. Okay, plus 80. Now, the reason I use square brackets now, square brackets always come into play when I have this number that I factored out, right? Like I have this 10 right here, okay, that I had to factor out. And because I factor out that 10, I'm going to need to multiply the 10 by that number right there, okay, in the end. So that's why I put it in square brackets. All right. So after I've done that, I am going to, I'm going to be able to drop my square brackets now. Okay. So I'm just going to have 10. Okay. Now square root of the first is x. Sine of the second is minus. Square root of the third is 8. Put my little squared, right? Now, what is 10 times negative 64? Negative 640, right? And then you still have this plus 80 at the end. Now, you don't take the 10 and you and multiply by the plus 80 because it's not in those brackets. Okay, plus 80 is kind of chilling all by itself. So, end result, 10 times x minus 8 squared, and then you're going to go minus 640 plus 80 equals negative 560. Okay? Perfect. Okay, I just looked in the back to make sure I didn't lie to you. All right, so that is 5C, 3C. And I would say that is basically as complicated as it gets, right? When you have that number in front. I can do another one just for good measure. So how about I do 3B? Okay, 3B says y equals 6x squared plus 24x plus 17. All right. Step 1, brackets around the x terms. Step 2, factor anything or factor the number attached to the x squared term. So divide everything by 6. Now that 6 comes out in front, and 6 divided by 6, that goes away, right? So you got your x squared. 24 divided by 6, positive 4x, and you leave your plus 17 on the side, right? Not dividing the 17 by 6. Then you look at the x term, okay? Right now the x term is 4. So you take 4 divided by 2, which is 2, and you square that, which is 4. Now, what do we do with those? We add 4, and then we subtract 4. Oh, not 6, 4. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So y equals square brackets now, right? Because I got that number there. So 6 times x squared plus 4x. What do we do first? Add the 4. Then close your bracket. Then what do we got to do? Then we got to subtract the 4. Good. And what can't I forget on the end here? This positive 17. Okay, don't forget about that. Now, what do you do? Okay, now you can drop your square brackets now. So you leave your 6. Okay, you have to square root the first term. Take the sine of the second term. Square root the third term. And put a squared. All right. Then what do we got to remember with these two that are in the square brackets? 6 and the negative 4. They multiply, right? It's like you're distributing that 6 to the negative 4. So when you multiply that, you get negative 24. And that last part is plus 17. So the final step here is just to combine your constants. So I'd have y equals 6 times x plus 2 squared, and then minus 24 plus 17 is negative 7. Okay, and that's that. So I guess hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps you see those steps, I guess, just maybe a couple more times so you can kind of see how they work or how they mesh together. But in regards to the textbook assignment, honestly, if you can get through number 2, okay, you can get through number 2 and number 3. If you can do one, like all of them from number 2 and all of them from number 3, you're going to be fine for the hand-in assignment. Okay. Looking at the textbook, they kind of ask funny questions like determining the maximum or minimum. Okay. That in order to do that, you could literally just take that quadratic and plug it into Desmos. Okay, you don't even have to complete the square for number 6 and 7. Okay, that's a big hint. But on the hand-in, I have you complete a question like number 2. So I have you do one like this. Okay, with no number in front of the x squared term. And then the second question on the hand-in has that number in front. Okay, so if you can get through 2 and 3, like practicing them, and checking your answers in the back to see if you do okay, that's good. And also, if you want to just dive into the hand-in too, that's fine. And then once you get to those completing the square questions, those last 2, you can always ask me for help, okay? And I can always do that. Can always help you that way too. All right. Okay, let me know if this doesn't help and you'd like to meet or do anything else, or what you'd like to do, okay? But I would say make sure you give number 2 and 3 on page 192 and 193 a go. Okay, try those out. Have your steps right beside you, and yeah, take it from there. Okay, good luck.